Welcome to the CareerMetis Podcast. This is your host, Nisar Ahmed. This is episode 92 of the CareerMetis Podcast. And this episode is part of the A Day in the Life of series. If you have followed us or if you have listened to any of the episodes in this series, you know that I conduct interviews with individuals from a particular career. And for today's episode, I'm speaking with someone in the recruiting space. Our guest's name is Sydnee Henning. She's a senior technical recruiter at Amazon. And Sydnee will be sharing her experience, how she got started in the profession, what she does day in, day out, and we'll learn a lot more about the role. Sydnee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before I jump into the role and also, of course, learning a little bit about yourself, I always start my interviews by asking my guests where they're calling from.
So I'm calling from Minneapolis.
Yeah, Minneapolis, right? So
Right.
I know you did mention you're calling from Minneapolis. A lot of the people do not know, but Minneapolis has a lot of headquarters. I think Target is based out of there, other kind of companies as well. But for those of us who are not very familiar with the city, could you share with us like a fun fact about Minneapolis?
Home to Prince, I'll say that, and music legend. A lot of great music in the Twin Cities, which is referring to St. Paul and Minneapolis metro area. And a lot of large corporations have headquarters here. Companies like Target Corporation, United Health Group, Cargill, some names that would be recognizable in Toronto as well.
Uh-huh. Before we get into the role, we would like to learn a little bit about yourself. So if you don't mind, if you could give us a quick introduction.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a senior technical recruiter with Amazon Corporation, and I have 20 years of experience, blended experience really, with both being a IT professional myself. I began my career in technical training, business analysis, and project management, and then segued into more sales or recruiting types of roles, always with a technology focus. For Amazon Corporation, I hire senior technology leaders for 6 North American campuses. Toronto is part of that as a growing market for us. And my focus is operations technology. So specifically, I lead efforts in hiring senior leaders for fulfillment, transportation, and logistics technology areas.
And for those of us who are not familiar with what a senior technical recruiter is, could you give maybe a quick overview of what the role entails?
So a senior technical recruiter is someone who both sources, meaning they're searching for appropriate candidates through different mediums like LinkedIn as an example. Workopolis could be another job board as an example, where we're looking at candidate profiles and finding the best fit, both from a cultural and communication perspective, as well as we're looking for specific technology skills. And a senior technical recruiter also does kind of full life cycle. So we would work with a candidate all the way through the process of, from the time we find your resume, engage with you, whether via email or phone, all the way to bringing you to an on-site or final interview and helping even to negotiate things like salary, relocation packages, depending on where the candidate lives and where they'd be working, and working with our executive leaders and putting together compensation packages for those candidates.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, is this a role that you envisioned when you graduated from college or university, or is this something that grew organically?
This is something that grew organically for me. I've always had a curiosity about technology, in particular emerging technology. I knew I didn't want to be a software developer. I did some programming in college and didn't enjoy it, if I can say that, and have a great respect for people who do. But I still wanted to stay connected somehow. And I love interacting with people. And so that's kind of part of where I moved into this role.
And I'm curious, I'm sure the audience as well, What does the day-to-day look like for senior technical recruiter?
So a day-to-day for a technical recruiter is really different depending on the job openings and job postings that you're trying to fill for the organization you support and work for. Lots of interpersonal connection. I'm on the phone the majority of the day talking to different either hiring leaders that I support that are trying to fill some of these senior technology roles, or on phone calls with candidates. And by candidates, I'm talking about prospective people who may want to work for our company. Sending out a lot of emails to solicit interest and see if people are interested in learning more about our organization. And I do a lot of reviewing candidate resumes and profiles. It isn't an automated system. I'm actually reading through everyone's resume and learning more about them to ask them questions related to their background and professional interests going forward. And lastly, we do a lot of, when I refer to sourcing, a lot of Boolean logic searches where I'm looking for very targeted either skills, whether it's an industry domain skill or let's say a technology skill like a particular software, whether or things like if it's mobile or I need somebody with embedded hardware experience as an example.
Interesting. So there is a variety of things you do on any given day to find candidates and put them through the process. Of all the things that you do, I'm curious, are there any things that you enjoy the most? Let's say the top 2 or 3 things.
I would say, well, I love engaging with candidates and talking to them and learning more about people's professional interests, what they're doing today, and what their career aspirations are. I've always gravitated, I think, naturally towards talent and career development. So I feel in a lot of ways like I'm an advocate for that as a technical recruiter. So I genuinely enjoy kind of being that matchmaker and helping people find the right role. That would be one of the top things. Another thing is I love when candidates come to the final interview. In particular, Amazon has a very lengthy process. And so when someone comes to meet with the team at a campus and go through that final interview, I love being able to connect with the candidate. It's very rewarding. And I love the engagement with the technical teams, learning more about what we're focused on, some of the products and innovation that we're driving, and being able to be part of that and help build and grow our company by adding, phenomenal talent. So those would be some of the top things I love.
So let me ask you, are there things that you do not enjoy or you find challenging?
I would say there are definitely things that you should think about that can be challenging as a technical recruiter if you choose this path. One would be, I think you have to be really tenacious, patient, and resilient. I will give an example. I have one senior leader that I recently hired. He and I spoke over a 2-year period before hiring him. And at different points, he was not interested in looking for a new opportunity. If you really want to be a technical recruiter, be successful, I think you need to know that you're going to invest in these relationships with candidates, and it may be a longer term fit. So that's one thing. I would say, I don't think it's necessarily a challenge, but I think it takes a certain personality to do that. I think there's also times where you really connect with a candidate and either they select not to move forward in the interview process or not to take a job with your organization, and or the person goes through all the interviews and they may not be selected as a finalist. You have to be flexible and open as a technical recruiter. I think, again, if you are a good recruiter, you become personally engaged with these people and candidates. So sometimes that's hard, right? When you want to really hire somebody and for whatever reason, it may not work out. I think lastly, regardless of any market, and I'll look at Toronto. Toronto is a phenomenal place to work and live. And it's a candidate-centric market. So as a recruiter, it may take quite a bit of effort in engaging different prospective employees and find the right resource to fill an open job posting.
Before I move on to the next question, you mentioned something very interesting, the term candidate-centric market. Would you mind clarifying that very quickly, what that means?
Absolutely. In many again, I support North American locations for my current role. Really, in a lot of the markets that I'm hiring in, there's low unemployment. There are a diverse array of employers to work for, whether they be small, mid-sized, startup, large enterprise organizations, and in particularly people who come from a computer science type of background, MIS, perhaps they have their MBA. In the senior leadership space that I'm in, they really have a lot of opportunities, a lot of choices for who would be their preferred employer to work for. There's a smaller percentage or pool of that talent, of those candidates, than there are job openings. So, really it's important in how you work with candidates to really explain your organization, because they have a lot of different opportunities to choose from.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because a lot of people are not aware, and that's actually good to know, especially for the ones who are living in Toronto, the challenges as well. So thanks for sharing that. I want to come back to the role now, and you give us a lot of insight into your experience. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? So someone listening to this, they think, okay, this is where I want to be. This sounds like a great career. I want to make an impact in the growing technology field, or in this as a technical recruiter. What do you recommend to them as how do they get started?
I think that's a great question. I would say, I think you can come from a diverse array of undergraduate majors to be a successful technical recruiter. And you don't have to necessarily come from, as an example, computer science background. I have noticed in my 20-year career some patterns in background. So I think people who are really successful could be coming from, let's say, human resources background, perhaps a business degree, people who naturally gravitate towards more sales types of opportunities. With that said, I think some advice to get started would be, one is look at, if you're, let's say, newer in your career in general, look at some entry-level types of roles that would move into technical recruiting. So as an example, the term sourcer is often used within the recruiting industry. Sourcing means you're the person going and doing the searches on different job boards or different sites, different job aggregators. Again, look at like a LinkedIn, or I'll cite Workopolis as an example, which is a big job site in Canada where you're looking for different resumes and profiles. Another entry-level role would be a recruiting coordinator. That's someone who helps to facilitate scheduling meetings and getting a candidate through whatever your company's sort of interview process looks like. But some other ideas to get started would be, I highly encourage you to network on LinkedIn with like-minded people or people who have titles that you're curious about. See if you can set up an informational phone call or meeting with them. I would say attend as many networking events as possible. I'll speak specifically to Toronto. There are some phenomenal networking groups available, anything from something that is very startup focused, HR focused, recruiting. So, there's a wide variety of networking groups you could go to. I would say market yourself in your resume as almost a sell sheet. And what I mean by that is really put together, let's say if you don't have a lot of recruiting experience, look at a recruiting job posting and look at the soft skills that are required. A lot of it may be around interpersonal communication, written communication, maybe ability to sell a particular opportunity. So if you naturally have some of those skills, making sure you're using language on your resume that reflects that, and almost selling the skills and attributes that you have as a candidate. I'd say pick up the phone, call different individuals, and again, for networking, ask for help. Perhaps you want to engage and work for a certain company as a technical recruiter and you're not sure the best way to approach it. See if, again, can you set up a coffee or a 10 to 15-minute informational call with someone who works for that organization. So I guess those would be some high-level tips to get started in recruiting.
And I'm curious, would they need any type of a degree, a specific degree or certifications to get started?
So, it's interesting. When I started out in my career, there was less certification and degrees. But as I think the industry and the role of recruiting has matured, there are several different certifications and organizations to look at. I'm just going to list a few that people could consider. One would be, there are a couple different organizations that are international. One is an organization called HRCI. It's a Human Resources Certification Institute. Again, it's an international organization. They have different exams you can take that are human resources related. So potentially employment relations, even things around legal background, that type of thing that you'd see more from an HR generalist role. With that said, they also have some areas within the certification exam that's focused on sourcing and recruiting. Another great organization that's, I think, doing more, not just related to human resources related roles like a human resources generalist or business partner, but again, recruiting, would be SHRM, and that's SHRM. That's the Society for Human Resource Management. They have several accreditations and certifications that you can get, and some have more of a recruiting type of focus. A couple other areas would be AIRS. It's AIRS. I believe they are an ADP company now. I think they were acquired by ADP. But they have, and I've taken some of their certifications previously, where they have what's called the Elite Certified Recruitment Expert. And I think they have 7 different certifications now that really relate to more of the skills in searching for candidates, qualifying candidates, that type of thing. Depending on the organization you work for, it'd be great to go through the AIRS certification process. LinkedIn would be another resource. LinkedIn has done a ton in general with learning. If you're going to take a path of a technical recruiter, there's 2 different areas I'd focus on. LinkedIn actually offers, I think, a 101, a 102, and a certification level for being a recruiter and being a LinkedIn recruiter, meaning you're really well versed with their software application and platform. I've gone through the 101 class and the 201, you can look it up. But I felt there was a lot of great information about best practices and tips when recruiting. Similarly, they offer a lot of technology high-level classes. Like they even offer one, how to become a data analyst and learn about that field. If you're going to be a technical or technology-related recruiter, you really do have to continue to learn and be curious regarding technology. So I am constantly, even in my own organization, even on LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning, taking classes to learn. I went through a Scrum Master certification program because I wanted to get a better understanding of what it'd be like to be a Scrum Master, as an example. But I highly encourage that as well. And then lastly, I'd say, looking at the organization you work for, they may offer a really formalized career path and recommendations for trainings. I know that at Amazon, very fortunate, they have literally hundreds of training courses for your career path as a professional recruiter. And then if you choose the path of a technical recruiter. And so I am probably on a monthly basis taking different recruiting courses to improve my skills.
That's amazing. First of all, thanks for the extensive resources. I'll make sure to include them. But one of the takeaways, I can tell why you're successful in your role, is you said you take these courses on a monthly basis. And that's just the key of that's just a hallmark of any successful professional. So I wanted to commend you on that. And also a lesson for our audience is no matter what you do, it does not end when you get the job. You have to constantly improve yourself.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Think of yourself as a life learner and just be really open. Yep.
So we talked so far about getting into the field and how to stay abreast of what's happening. I'm just curious, what does an ideal career path look like? Where could someone who is in senior technical recruiting, where could the path take them?
You know, it's interesting. In technical recruiting, I think you could build your career in several directions. One would be leveling. So the level of types of roles that you're recruiting for. I'll cite myself as an example. I traditionally recruited for more hands-on technology roles. I'm now recruiting for senior leaders. In Amazon's culture, what that means is I recruit for people that are leaders of leaders, and they're managing anywhere from 4 to 6 managers themselves and then their teams. as you further your career, you could take it in different directions, like becoming a recruiting manager, becoming an HR business partner, or an HR generalist type of role. You could also do things like become a program manager. There are often project-based initiatives on improving how your company is doing things like employment branding, what the candidate experience is like when a candidate is interviewing with your company, looking at the operational model, how you interview, the process itself, looking at market analytics. You could take on a program manager role where you're focused in one of those operational areas. And I think too, for a technical recruiter, it's not impossible to move into, as an example, an operations manager role or move into a sales or business development role. Really, when you're in recruiting, you are sometimes acting as an operations manager when you're engaging with some of the leaders you work with. Similarly, you are selling. You're selling an opportunity. You're selling the company that you're branding and working for. And that takes a lot of effort. So I think that a natural path too could be moving into a business development or sales role.
Mm-hmm. So the path is varied and they could go into multiple roads.
It really is. Yep. I think you can take your career direction in many, many ways.
I do want to ask this question because you did mention technology a couple of times. And also at the beginning, you mentioned briefly, there is a little bit of manual work in finding quality candidates. So I'm just curious. I know almost every role today, technology has had an impact or is having an impact. How has technology changed recruiting in your experience?
I would say it's interesting. We're getting into sort of next generation of how we look for candidates. I'm engaged on a project right now where we're using 2 different marketing analytic platforms and looking at data and metrics around different markets. As an example, look at Toronto, look at Minneapolis. I'm doing more research on, and it's great to have that data available to me to see what types of candidates live in those metro areas, what types of skill sets, even information like, do candidates prefer to live in that metro or would they relocate, etc. That's all because of technology. I'm able to do that market analysis. And in many ways, I feel like a data analyst in some of the efforts that I'm doing today. I think a second piece is typically in recruiting today, in all roles, we're using software to do our jobs. Typically, what we call an ATS or applicant tracking system. So I'll use you as an example. If you were to send me your resume, I would be tracking your information and your interview processes with us in the software application tracking system, the ATS. Technology, though, has gotten so much better that, again, there is embedded logic that can tell me percentage fit you are for certain roles within our company. So it's helping me, instead of just me looking at your resume and saying, gosh, you'd be great in a business development role or you'd be great in a project management role. I'm able to actually see percentage-wise a weighted evaluation of which types of roles you'd fit best within our organization. And there's also a lot more workflow automation too, which makes our roles easier. So I'd say those are some areas that technology has impacted recruiting.
And this all sounds positive, right? Looks like these are all helping you in many ways be more efficient.
I think so. I think more efficient and, truly in the end, it's all about the candidate experience. And in this case, people are applying to the company I work for. They're my customers, right? And so the more analytics I can gain and understand more about them, about where they're living, all kinds of information, it helps me give them a better experience when they're interviewing with my company too, which I think is great.
One of the final questions, what advice would you give specifically to someone who wants to get into the field today?
I would say go for it. It's interesting. I think similar to, I was a business analyst early in my career. And I remember when I was a business analyst, people didn't know what that was. Now we have business analysts, business systems analysts, data analysts, etc., meaning that job family or that career path has really evolved quite a bit. Similarly, in recruiting, I think people thought of it as not as formalized of a role. And really, you can take your career in a lot of directions. There are more universities and colleges that are offering even human resources or operation management majors that have an emphasis on recruiting. I think that we are going to see in the future recruiters taking on more responsibility. And I think it's a great career to be in.
Wow. So far, all the answers you've given is amazing. You've covered in depth about the role, some advice for someone getting started, and also thanks for the frankness. I learned a lot, even though I've mentioned in some of my interviews in the past that I had a very brief stint in recruiting, but even for someone who had a little bit of the inside scoop, this was very eye-opening. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for sharing your advice and wisdom so openly.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone, for listening to yet another episode of the CareerMetis Podcast. I have written a brief summary of the interview and also the link to the resources that was mentioned during the interview. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to post a comment or review. If you really loved it, definitely go ahead and share this among your network. Until next time, this is your host, Nisar Ahmed. Thank you.